"You're too boring for me now." 5 words. That's all it took to end 10 years of marriage. I remember standing in our kitchen, holding a plate I had just washed, when Daniel said it like he was talking about the weather. No anger in his voice, no guilt, just tired, like I was a chore he had finally decided to stop doing. I didn't drop the plate. I wanted to. I wanted something to shatter, because something inside me already had. "Boring?" I said. "What does that even mean, Daniel?" He shrugged. He actually shrugged, like I'd asked him what he wanted for dinner. "I don't know. You used to be fun. Now it's just work, home, sleep, same thing every single day. I need something else. Someone else." And there it was. Someone else. I was 35 years old, standing in the kitchen I had decorated with my own hands, in the home I had built with my own sacrifices, hearing the man I loved for a decade tell me I was no longer interesting enough to keep. If you're watching this, maybe you've heard something like this too. Maybe someone made you feel like your love, your loyalty, your years of showing up meant nothing, because you stopped being exciting. Stay with me till the end, because 6 months after Daniel walked out that door, he came back. Not with flowers, not with apologies at first. He came back, begging. And what happened next taught me something about revenge that no one ever tells you. But let's go back to the beginning, because to understand how deep this betrayal cut, you need to understand what I gave up to make that marriage work. My name is Sarah. I was 35 years old when my marriage ended, but I want to take you back further, to the woman I was before Daniel, before the wedding, before I learned how easily love can be used against you. At 24, I was loud. I laughed too hard at my own jokes. I traveled with a backpack and barely any money, and I said yes to almost everything. I painted. I danced badly in my kitchen. I had dreams of opening my own design studio one day. Then I met Daniel. He was charming in that quiet, confident way. He noticed things about me nobody else did. He told me I was the most alive person he'd ever met. He said my energy was addictive. We got married when I was 26, and slowly, without either of us really noticing, life started to reshape me. There were bills. There was his career, which needed support. There was a house that needed managing, meals that needed cooking, a marriage that needed maintaining. I stopped painting because there wasn't time. I stopped traveling because he said it was impractical. I put my design studio dream in a drawer and told myself. Later, I told myself I wasn't losing myself. I was just prioritizing being responsible, being a good wife. Daniel's career took off. Mine quietly faded into the background because someone had to keep the house running while he worked late, traveled for meetings, built his name. And I did it. Gladly, at first. Because I loved him. Because I believed we were building something together. But somewhere in those 10 years, the woman who danced badly in her kitchen disappeared. And in her place was someone who woke up at 6, made breakfast, went to a job she didn't love, came home, cooked dinner, cleaned, and went to sleep. Repeat. I didn't notice I had become boring. I thought I had become dependable. Daniel noticed the difference, though. He just never told me not until it was too late to fix it. Looking back now, there were signs. I just didn't want to see them, because seeing them would have meant admitting my marriage was falling apart. About a year before that kitchen conversation, Daniel started working later. Not occasionally, constantly. He'd come home after I was already asleep and leave before I woke up. His phone became a mystery. He used to leave it on the counter, screen up, no secrets. Then, slowly, it started going face down. Then it started going into his pocket, even at home. Then he started taking it into the bathroom when he showered. I noticed. Of course I noticed, but I told myself stories to explain it away. He's stressed with the promotion. He's just tired, that's why he's distant. Every marriage goes through quiet seasons. I made excuses for him because the alternative was too frightening to face directly. There was a night, maybe 8 months before the end, when he came home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. I remember standing in the hallway, my heart pounding, and I almost asked him. The words were right there. But then he smiled at me, kissed my forehead, and said, "Rough day." Client dinner ran long, and I let it go, because some small, scared part of me knew that if I pulled that thread, the whole sweater might unravel. I wish I had pulled it anyway. Instead, I tried harder. I cooked his favorite meals. I asked about his day, even when he barely answered. I planned a weekend getaway that he canceled last minute for work. I was trying to save something that, unknown to me, he had already decided to leave. Because while I was trying to become interesting enough to keep his attention, he had already found someone else to give it to. The betrayal didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, like a puzzle I was forced to assemble against my will. It started with a text notification that flashed on his phone screen while it was charging on the kitchen counter. He was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, I genuinely wasn't, but the screen lit up and I saw a name I didn't recognize. "Miss you already. Can't wait for tonight." My stomach dropped so fast I had to put my hand on the counter to steady myself. I told myself there could be an explanation. A colleague, a joke between coworkers, anything other than what my gut already knew. That night, I didn't confront him. I know some of you are yelling at the screen right now, telling me I should have said something immediately, but betrayal has a way of freezing you. You're not just afraid of the truth, you're afraid of what the truth will force you to do next. Instead, I watched. I paid attention in a way I hadn't in years. I noticed the new gym membership he suddenly needed at odd hours. I noticed how he started dressing differently, buying new clothes, new cologne, things he never bothered with for me anymore. 2 weeks later, I found her name properly. Her name was Melissa, 26 years old, worked at his company in marketing. I found photos on a private social media account he thought I would never look for, because I had never once given him a reason not to trust me. There she was, laughing beside him at a work event I wasn't invited to, sitting close to him at a bar. In one photo, his hand was on her waist. I sat on the bathroom floor at 11 at night, staring at my phone, feeling like the last 10 years of my life had just been quietly erased. I didn't cry loudly. I cried the way you do when you're trying not to wake someone up, silent, shaking, swallowing every sound. Because somewhere inside me, I already knew. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a second life he had been building while I stayed home believing in our first one. I didn't explode. I didn't throw his things out the window like people do in movies. I'm not built that way, and honestly, part of me still hoped there was an explanation that would make this all make sense. 2 days after finding those photos, I sat him down. "Who is Melissa?" I asked, keeping my voice steady even though my hands were shaking under the table. For a moment, something flickered across his face. Panic, maybe, or maybe just the calculation of how much he could still get away with. "She's just someone from work," he said. "Why?" I put my phone on the table, the photo still open. His jaw tightened. There was a long silence. And then, instead of apologizing, instead of showing even a flicker of shame, Daniel exhaled like he was relieved to finally stop pretending. "Fine. Yes, there's something going on," he said. "But Sarah, you have to understand, things haven't been right between us for a long time." I remember feeling like the floor was tilting. He wasn't sorry. He was explaining himself like I was the unreasonable one for being hurt. "You stopped trying," he continued. "You stopped being, you, the fun, spontaneous woman I married, disappeared, and some tired, predictable version of you took her place." That's when he said it. The line that would replay in my mind for months afterward. "You're too boring for me now." I sat there, stunned into silence, while the man I had given 10 years to told me that my loyalty, my sacrifices, my quiet, steady love had somehow become my biggest flaw. I wanted to scream at him. I became boring doing everything to keep this marriage running while you built a second life behind my back. But grief has a strange way of stealing your voice exactly when you need it most. A week later, he packed a bag and moved into an apartment near his office. Officially, he said, to give us space to think. Unofficially, everyone, including me, knew exactly where he was really going. The first 2 weeks after Daniel left were the hardest of my life. The house felt enormous and empty. I would wake up in the middle of the night, reach for him out of habit, and remember all over again that he was gone. Some mornings I couldn't get out of bed. I called in sick to work more times than I want to admit. I kept replaying the last 10 years, searching for the exact moment things went wrong, like if I found it, I could go back and fix it. Was it the night I canceled our date because I was too tired? Was it the year I stopped painting? Was it simply me? That's the cruelest part of betrayal. It doesn't just break your heart. It makes you question your own worth. It makes you wonder if you deserved to be discarded. My sister Claire was the one who finally shook me out of it. She showed up at my house one evening with takeout and refused to leave. "You are not boring," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "You are exhausted. There's a difference. You gave everything you had to that marriage, and he decided your exhaustion was your fault instead of his." I didn't believe her at first. When someone you love tells you you're not enough, some wounded part of you believes them, even when logic says otherwise. But something Claire said that night stayed with me. 6 months from now, you get to decide who you become next. He already decided who he wants to be. Don't let his decision decide yours. I didn't know it yet, but that sentence would become the quiet foundation of everything that happened next. Grief doesn't disappear on command, but at some point, you have to choose whether you're going to let it define you or teach you something. About 3 weeks after Daniel left, I made a decision that scared me more than anything else in my life. I decided I wasn't going to spend the next year of my life mourning a man who had already moved on so easily. I started small. I signed up for a painting class the first time I'd touched a paintbrush in almost 8 years. My hands were rusty, my first few pieces were clumsy, but something inside me woke up that I thought had died a long time ago. I started walking every morning before work, not to lose weight, not for him, not for anyone, just to feel the version of myself that used to move through the world with energy instead of exhaustion. I finally opened that drawer where I had buried my design studio dream. I pulled out old sketches, old business plans I had written in my 20s. Full of hope and ambition I thought I'd never feel again. It wasn't easy. There were nights I cried into my pillow, missing him despite everything he'd done. There were moments I almost called him just to hear his voice. Healing isn't a straight line, it's messy, and it doubles back on itself constantly. But slowly, week by week, something shifted. I started saying yes to things again. Dinner with friends I'd neglected for years. A weekend trip with Claire. A pottery class that led to a new friendship with a woman named Rena, who would later become one of the most important people in my new life. I wasn't doing any of this to make Daniel jealous or to prove something to him. I want to be honest about that. I was doing it because I was finally done shrinking myself to fit into a marriage that had already ended in every way that mattered. For the first time in years, I wasn't asking myself, how do I keep him interested? I was asking, what do I actually want? And that question changed everything. 2 months after Daniel left, I made the boldest decision of my adult life. I used the small savings I had quietly set aside over the years' money he always dismissed as unnecessary, and I put down a deposit on a tiny studio space above a bakery downtown. I was terrified. Starting a design business at 35, alone, with no partner to fall back on financially, felt reckless. But for the first time in a decade, I felt something other than exhaustion. I felt alive. I threw myself into the work. I designed logos, branding, and interiors for small local businesses, first the bakery downstairs, a friend's boutique, a neighbor's coffee shop. Word started to spread. My designs were fresh, distinct, full of color and detail that people said felt different from the corporate sameness they'd seen elsewhere. Rena, my new friend from pottery class, turned out to be a marketing consultant. She helped me build a small online presence, and within a few months, my little studio started gaining real clients, a restaurant chain looking to rebrand, a wellness company needing a complete visual identity. I want to be clear about something. This wasn't a fairy tale overnight transformation. There were slow weeks with no clients. There were nights I doubted every decision I'd made. There were moments I missed the comfort and security of my old life with Daniel, even knowing what he'd done. But I kept going. Because for the first time in years, I was building something that was entirely mine. No one could take credit for it. No one could dismiss it as impractical. It was mine. By the 4th month, my studio was doing well enough that I hired my first part-time assistant. I started sleeping better. I started laughing, really laughing, the kind that used to come so easily to me in my 20s. I looked different too, though that was never the goal. I was more confident, more present, more myself than I'd been in a decade. Friends started commenting on it, even people I barely knew. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Daniel's new relationship with Melissa was quietly falling apart. I didn't know it yet, but karma, it turns out, doesn't need help from anyone. It simply waits. I found out what was happening in his life the way most people do these days through mutual friends who couldn't help but share the details. Apparently, the fun, exciting relationship Daniel had left me for wasn't quite what he expected once the initial excitement faded. Melissa, it turned out, had her own demanding career, her own late nights, her own life that didn't revolve around making him feel entertained. The very qualities that had made her so appealing during their affair, her independence, her busy schedule. Her unavailability became the exact same complaints Daniel had once thrown at me. According to a mutual friend, Daniel started complaining that Melissa was never around, that she was always working, that their relationship felt like it was missing something. The irony was almost too perfect. The man who called me boring for being consistent and present was now upset that his new partner wasn't consistent or present enough. Within 4 months, their relationship reportedly hit a rough patch. Melissa, apparently uninterested in settling into the domestic routine Daniel now suddenly seemed to want, pulled away. By month 5, they had broken up entirely. I want to be honest with you, when I first heard this, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a strange, quiet sadness. Not for him, but for the 10 years I had spent trying to be enough for someone who was never going to be satisfied, no matter what I did. Because here's the truth this story taught me. Daniel didn't leave because I was boring. Daniel left because he was chasing a feeling, excitement, novelty, attention instead of building something real. And feelings like that never last. They always fade, and then they demand a new source. I wasn't the problem. I was simply the person who had been consistent long enough for him to take for granted. 6 months after Daniel walked out of our kitchen and told me I was too boring for him. My phone rang late on a Tuesday evening. His name flashed on the screen. My heart did something complicated, half old habit, half genuine shock. I almost didn't answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring out, to prove to myself I had truly moved on. But curiosity, and maybe a small unhealed part of me, made me pick up. "Sarah," he said, and his voice sounded different, smaller somehow. "Daniel," there was a long pause. "Can we talk? Please, I've been thinking about everything. And I made a huge mistake." I sat down slowly on my studio's worn leather couch, the one I'd bought with my own money, in the business I'd built with my own hands. "What kind of mistake exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, though inside, old wounds were stirring in ways I hadn't expected. "Leaving you," he said. "Sarah, I don't know what happened to me. I think I got scared of getting older, of things feeling routine, and I convinced myself that excitement was what I needed. But it wasn't real. What you gave me for 10 years, that was real. I let the silence stretch, because for once in my life, I wasn't going to rush to comfort him. Melissa and I ended things a few weeks ago, he continued. It wasn't what I thought it would be. She's got her own life, her own ambitions, and honestly, I realized how much I took for granted with you. How much you did. How much you gave. I was chasing something that doesn't actually exist. I closed my eyes, letting his words sink in. 6 months ago, hearing this might have shattered me back into a version of myself that would have forgiven him instantly, desperate to return to the safety of what we once had. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Daniel, I said finally, do you know what I've done in the last 6 months? He was quiet, clearly expecting me to have spent that time waiting, hoping, hurting in place. I started my own design studio, I continued. I've hired staff. I've reconnected with parts of myself I buried for a decade trying to make you happy. I learned that being consistent, being dependable, being present, that's not boring, Daniel. That's called love. You just never learned how to appreciate it until it was gone. Daniel didn't stop after that phone call. Over the following 2 weeks, he called repeatedly. He sent messages, each one longer and more desperate than the last, filled with apologies, memories of our early years together, promises of change. Eventually, he asked to meet in person, and after some hesitation, I agreed. Not because I wanted him back, that door had long since closed, but because I wanted the closure of facing him as the woman I had become, not the woman he had discarded. We met at a quiet cafe downtown, not far from my studio. He looked different, tired, thinner, older somehow, the confidence that once radiated from him replaced by something more fragile. You look amazing, he said as I sat down. Really different, happy. I am happy, I said simply. He fumbled through an explanation of everything that had happened with Melissa, how the initial excitement had faded quickly once real life set back in, how she had her own demanding career and simply wasn't willing to reshape her life around him the way I once had. I realize now, he said, his voice cracking slightly, that what I called boring was actually stability. It was you showing up for me every single day, even when I didn't deserve it. I threw away something real for a feeling that didn't last 3 months once the newness wore off. Then came the moment I think he'd been building toward the entire conversation. I want to come back, Sarah. I want us to try again. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking anyway. Please. I looked at this man, the one I had loved for a decade, the one who had broken something in me I wasn't sure could ever fully heal, and I felt something unexpected. Not anger, not longing, just clarity. Daniel, I said gently, 6 months ago, you looked at 10 years of my loyalty and called it boring. You didn't just cheat on me, you tried to convince me that my love, my consistency, my sacrifices were somehow my failure. And now, because your new relationship didn't give you what you thought it would, you want to come back to the woman you discarded. I know it sounds bad, he said quietly. It's not that it sounds bad, I said. It's that it reveals exactly who you are. You didn't come back because you truly understand what you lost. You came back because being alone and realizing what you threw away is harder than you expected. That's not love, Daniel, that's regret. And I refuse to spend the rest of my life being someone's backup plan. Daniel sat across from me in stunned silence, clearly having expected either forgiveness or at least an argument he could fight his way through. He got neither. So that's it? He asked, his voice unsteady. There's no chance for us? I thought carefully before answering, because I wanted him to truly hear me, not just receive a rejection he could dismiss as bitterness. There was a version of me, I said, who would have taken you back in a heartbeat, who would have believed that loving you meant proving I wasn't boring, proving I could be exciting enough to deserve you. That woman doesn't exist anymore, Daniel, and honestly, I'm grateful for that. I built something of my own these past 6 months, I continued. Not to spite you, not to make you jealous, but because somewhere along the way, in trying to be the perfect wife for you, I forgot how to be a whole person for myself. Losing you, painful as it was, forced me to find her again. I don't expect you to understand this fully, I said, but what you called boring wasn't me failing you. It was me choosing you every single day for 10 years while you were quietly deciding I wasn't enough. I'm not willing to make that mistake again, not with you, and not with anyone. Daniel didn't argue. I think, somewhere underneath the desperation, he understood that something had permanently shifted. The power in our relationship, the power he had always held without either of us fully realizing it was gone. I'm sorry, he said finally, quietly, and for the first time in this entire story. I believed he actually meant it. I know, I said, but sorry doesn't rebuild what's broken. It just means you finally understand what you destroyed. I stood up, left enough money on the table for my coffee, and walked out of that cafe without looking back, not out of cruelty, not out of a need for dramatic revenge, but because I finally understood something crucial. The best revenge was never going to be found in punishing him. The best revenge was simply refusing to let his mistake become my life sentence. It's been a little over a year now since Daniel first said those 5 words in our kitchen. My design studio has grown beyond what I ever imagined. 3 employees now, clients across the state, a reputation built entirely on my own 2 hands. I bought a small house near my studio, painted it in colors I actually love, filled it with plants and artwork, and a life that belongs completely to me. Some mornings, I still wake up and feel a flicker of the old grief, and that's okay. Healing was never about erasing the pain entirely. It was about learning to carry it without letting it define every part of me. I heard, through mutual friends, that Daniel eventually moved to a different city for a fresh start. I don't know all the details of his life now, and honestly, I've stopped needing to know. My story isn't about him anymore. It stopped being about him the day I decided to rebuild my life around myself instead of around his approval. If you're going through something similar right now, if someone has made you feel like your steadiness, your loyalty, your love was somehow not enough, I want you to hear this clearly. Being consistent is not boring. Being dependable is not a flaw. Real love isn't built on constant excitement and novelty. It's built on showing up, again and again, even when it's not thrilling. The people who mistake your stability for boredom are usually the ones incapable of appreciating something real. And when they eventually chase that fleeting excitement, and it fades, because it always does, they'll come looking for the very stability they once dismissed. You don't owe them a second chance. You don't owe them your forgiveness on demand. What you owe yourself is the chance to rebuild, to rediscover who you are outside of someone else's approval, and to walk forward into a life that finally, completely belongs to you. Daniel called me too boring for him. What he really meant was that I had become too easy to overlook because I never stopped loving him quietly, faithfully, without asking for applause. I learned, the hard way, that being taken for granted isn't a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of someone else's inability to see what they had until it was gone. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been made to feel like you weren't enough for someone who never deserved your loyalty in the first place, know this: your next chapter can be the one where you finally choose yourself. And sometimes, that choice is the most powerful revenge of all.